I used to believe that trust disappeared all at once. Like a light switch. One moment you loved someone with your whole heart, and the next you looked at them as though they were a stranger. I know now that I was wrong. Trust doesn't leave in a single moment. It slips away quietly. One unanswered question at a time. By the time you realize it's gone, you're already standing in the middle of memories that no longer feel safe. My name is Anna Bennett. I'm 69 years old, and until 3 days before Christmas, I believed I understood every important person in my life. Especially my son. If you had asked anyone in our neighborhood about Daniel Bennett, they would have described the same man. Reliable. Patient. The kind of person who always returned borrowed tools cleaner than when he received them. The kind of father who never missed Lily's piano recitals or Ben's Little League games. The kind of son who still stopped by his mother's house several times a week, even though he lived only 15 minutes away with a family and a full-time job of his own. After my husband, Robert, died 6 years earlier, Daniel never tried to convince me to sell the house. In fact, he argued with anyone who suggested it. "This is Mom's home," he would say. "She'll leave when she's ready, not when everyone else thinks she should." I loved him for that. Robert had built this house with his own hands. Not every nail, of course. He wasn't a carpenter. But every room carried his fingerprints. The oak shelves in the living room. The brick flower bed beside the porch. The wooden swing hanging beneath the maple tree in the backyard. He spent 38 years slowly turning an ordinary house into the place where our family happened. Christmases, birthdays, graduations, late-night conversations after Daniel's first heartbreak, Sunday dinners where the grandchildren laughed so loudly the windows seemed to vibrate. People say a house is only wood and concrete. They've never loved one long enough. Every morning, I still walked through those rooms with my coffee, touching little pieces of Robert without realizing I was doing it. His reading glasses remained inside the top drawer of his desk. His old fishing hat still hung in the garage. Sometimes I caught myself setting 2 mugs on the kitchen counter before remembering I only needed one. Grief changes over time. It doesn't disappear. It simply becomes quieter. Daniel understood that better than anyone. Every Thursday morning, he stopped by with coffee from the little cafe near his office. Always the same order. Medium latte. Extra cinnamon. Half sweet. He claimed they knew my drink before he even reached the counter. I suspected he simply ordered it so often they remembered. Emily usually visited on Tuesday evenings. She never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes it was homemade soup. Sometimes fresh bread. Sometimes nothing more than a bag of groceries because she'd noticed I was running low on milk or eggs. She never made me feel like someone who needed help. She made it feel like families simply looked after one another. I had never called her my daughter-in-law. Not because she wasn't. Because calling her my daughter always felt more accurate. When people asked how many children I had, I answered, 2. No one ever questioned it. Neither did Emily. The week before Christmas followed its usual rhythm. The tree stood in the corner of my living room, covered with ornaments collected over 4 decades. Some were expensive. Most weren't. My favorite was still the crooked paper angel Daniel made in 2nd grade. Its wings had been glued on upside down. Robert laughed every time we hung it. "Looks like she's trying to fly back to heaven." We never replaced it. Perfection was never the point. 3 nights before Christmas, Daniel and Emily came over after dinner. Lily and Ben stayed home with a babysitter because Daniel wanted to fix a cabinet door that had started sticking in the kitchen. Emily wrapped presents at the dining room table while Daniel worked with a screwdriver and a flashlight. The house felt warm, comfortable, normal. We talked about Christmas dinner. Emily wanted to try a new stuffing recipe. I pretended to object because Robert would have insisted nothing should ever replace the old one. Daniel laughed. Dad would probably complain about it first and ask for seconds anyway. He absolutely would, I said. For a little while, it felt as though Robert was sitting there with us. After the cabinet was repaired, Daniel carried a box into my old study. "I'll leave these papers in here for now." Emily followed him inside. "I'll help you organize them." I didn't pay much attention. Daniel often used the study when he helped me sort insurance papers or old tax records. The room had become something of a family filing cabinet after Robert passed away. I stayed in the kitchen rinsing the coffee mugs. The dishwasher hummed softly beside me. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches against the windows. I reached for a dish towel. Then I realized I'd forgotten my reading glasses in the hallway. As I walked toward the bedroom, I passed the study. The door wasn't fully closed. Only an inch or two. Just enough for voices to drift into the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen. In fact, I would have kept walking if Daniel hadn't spoken my name. Mom. I slowed without meaning to. The dishwasher was still running. The wind continued tapping against the house. Their voices faded in and out between the sounds. Before New Year's. I couldn't hear the beginning of the sentence. Only those 3 words. Emily answered so quietly that I almost missed her. Can't know why. I stopped. The hallway suddenly felt much colder than it had a moment earlier. Daniel spoke again. This time, a little more clearly. I don't like keeping this from her. Emily didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice sounded gentle. I know. Another gust of wind struck the side of the house. The next sentence disappeared completely. I heard only scattered words. If she finds out. Never. Then silence. Papers slid across a desk. A chair moved. I realized I was still standing in the hallway. Listening. A flush of embarrassment spread across my face. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't my place to overhear it. I quietly stepped away before either of them opened the door. By the time they returned to the kitchen, I was wiping the same clean countertop for what must have been the 3rd time. Neither of them seemed unusual. Daniel smiled. Cabinets fixed. Emily picked up her purse. We should get home before the kids convince the babysitter to let them eat ice cream for dinner. I laughed. Drive carefully. Daniel hugged me. I'll stop by Thursday morning with coffee. Like always? Like always. I watched their taillights disappear down the driveway. Then I locked the front door and turned off the Christmas tree. Normally, that soft glow disappearing into darkness made the house feel peaceful. That night, it only made the silence louder. I climbed into bed and closed my eyes. For several minutes, I listened to the old furnace clicking on and off beneath the floor. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Families kept surprises from one another all the time. Birthday gifts. Holiday plans. Medical appointments. Any one of those could explain what I'd heard. But no matter how many reasonable answers I imagined, one sentence refused to leave me. She can't know why. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same fragments repeating themselves. Before New Year's. She can't know why. I don't like keeping this from her. None of those sentences meant anything by themselves. Together, they refused to leave me alone. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I slipped out of bed, wrapped a sweater around my shoulders, and wandered into the kitchen. The house looked different at night. The refrigerator hummed softly. Moonlight spilled across the hardwood floor. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner of the living room because I'd forgotten to unplug it before bed. Robert always teased me about that. You'll bankrupt us one Christmas bulb at a time. I smiled at the memory before the smile quietly disappeared. There was something comforting about talking to memories. They never kept secrets. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window, looking across the backyard. Snow was expected before Christmas. The weather forecast said we might wake up to a white Christmas for the first time in almost 5 years. Normally, that would have made me happy. Instead, I found myself wondering why my son had sounded so troubled. Not guilty. Troubled. There was a difference. Daniel had never been good at hiding his feelings. When he was 8 years old, he tried sneaking a cookie before dinner. He confessed before he'd even taken a bite. When he was 16, he dented Robert's truck backing out of the driveway. He left a handwritten apology on the steering wheel before either of us noticed the damage. Lying simply wasn't something Daniel did well, which was exactly why his words in the study bothered me. He hadn't sounded dishonest. He'd sounded reluctant. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made the mystery harder to understand. I finally fell asleep sometime after 4. At exactly 9:15 the next morning, a familiar pickup truck rolled into my driveway. Right on schedule, Daniel stepped out carrying 2 paper cups. He knocked once before using the spare key to let himself inside. Morning. Mom. Morning. He handed me my coffee. Extra cinnamon. You remembered. I always remember. His smile was warm, familiar, completely ordinary. For a moment, I felt ashamed of myself. Maybe I'd imagined the tension in his voice the night before. Maybe Emily had been planning a surprise for Christmas. Maybe everything really was exactly as it appeared. We spent nearly an hour talking about ordinary things. Ben had scored 2 goals during an indoor soccer game. Lily wanted a telescope because she'd become fascinated with astronomy. Emily was still trying to convince everyone to taste her new stuffing recipe. Nothing felt forced. Nothing felt rehearsed. I began to relax. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The smile disappeared from his face. "I should take this outside," he said. "Outside. Not the kitchen. Not the living room. Outside." He slipped through the back door and closed it behind him. Without thinking, I walked toward the sink. From there, I could see him standing on the patio through the window above it. His back was turned toward the house. He paced slowly across the concrete, one hand in his coat pocket. The glass muffled his voice. I couldn't hear complete sentences. Only scattered words carried by the wind. Today. Before. Documents. Then he stopped walking. I know. Another pause. No. I'll talk to her. When he came back inside, he tucked his phone into his jacket pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded a little too quickly. "Just work." "What kind of work keeps calling 2 days before Christmas?" He laughed softly. "You'd be surprised. Maybe I would've. Maybe I already was." A few minutes later, he stood to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow." "So soon?" "I promised Emily we'd finish wrapping presents tonight." I walked him to the front door. Just before he stepped outside, he turned back. "Mom?" "Yes? If you need anything." He hesitated. "Anything at all. Just call me. I always do." "I know." He smiled again. This time it didn't quite reach his eyes. After he left, I gathered the empty coffee cups and carried them into the kitchen. One of them still held a receipt tucked beneath the cardboard sleeve. I almost threw it away without looking. Then I noticed it wasn't a receipt. It was the corner of a folded envelope. Curious, I slid it free. Across the front, typed in neat black letters, were 4 words. Bennett Family Living Trust. I frowned. The envelope wasn't sealed. There was no address. No stamp. Just those 4 words. My heart began beating faster. A trust. Robert and I had created 1 year ago. I remembered signing stacks of paperwork in Mr. Harris's office after Daniel and Emily had their first child. Robert said it was simply good planning. I hadn't thought about it since. Why was Daniel carrying an envelope with that name? And why hadn't he mentioned it? I stared at it for several seconds before my phone rang. "Emily." I answered. "Hi. Sweetheart." "Anna?" She sounded out of breath. Did Daniel accidentally leave an envelope there? I looked down at the one in my hand. Maybe. It says Bennett Family Living Trust. The words landed harder because she'd said them before I had. Yes. There was a brief silence. If he did. Another pause. "Please don't open it." I felt my stomach tighten. I wasn't planning to. "I know. It's just." She stopped herself. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing." It didn't sound like nothing. I shouldn't have called. "Emily. Daniel will explain everything." "When?" "I don't know." "Does this have something to do with what I overheard last night?" Silence. Not the silence of a dropped call. The silence of someone choosing not to answer. "Emily? I have to go." The line went dead. I remained standing in the middle of my kitchen, the envelope still resting in my hand. "Please don't open it." Not because it was private. Not because it belonged to Daniel. Because, somehow, she already knew exactly which envelope I had found. I laid it gently on the kitchen table. Every sensible part of me knew what I should do. Leave it alone. Call Daniel. Hand it back the next time I saw him. Instead, I found myself staring at those 4 typed words. Bennett Family Living Trust. The envelope wasn't thick. Whatever was inside couldn't have been more than a few pages. I reached toward it. Stopped, pulled my hand back. Robert used to say that curiosity was harmless until it began looking for evidence. I wasn't looking for evidence. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The doorbell rang. The sound startled me enough that I nearly knocked the envelope onto the floor. I hurried to the front door. Standing on the porch was my neighbor, Carol Jensen, holding a tin of homemade fudge. "I figured you could use some Christmas calories," she said with a laugh. I smiled and invited her inside. As I carried the tin into the kitchen, I quietly slipped the envelope beneath a folded dish towel. I wasn't trying to hide it from Carol. I wasn't even sure why I'd covered it. But for the first time in 6 years, something inside my own home suddenly felt like a secret. Carol had lived across the street for almost 20 years. She was the kind of neighbor every community hoped for. She watered my flowers whenever I traveled. She accepted packages left on my porch. She also possessed a remarkable talent for sensing when something was bothering someone. The moment she stepped into my kitchen, she tilted her head. You look tired. I didn't sleep very well. Worried about Christmas? I suppose. She smiled as she placed the tin on the counter. You're a terrible liar, Anna. I've always been. She poured herself a cup of coffee without asking. She'd been doing that for years. I'll stay 10 minutes, she said. Long enough to remind you that the world won't end if the turkey dries out. I laughed. It never has. We talked about ordinary things. The weather. The Christmas parade. The bakery downtown that somehow managed to sell out of cinnamon rolls before 9 every morning. Normale conversation. Comfortable conversation. The kind of conversation I desperately needed. Then Carol looked toward the Christmas tree. You know what I admire most about Daniel? I looked up. What? He never lets you feel alone. The words landed harder than she could have imagined. No, I answered quietly. He doesn't. When my mother was your age, Carol continued. My brother visited maybe twice a year. Daniel practically lives here. I forced a smile. He's a good son. The best. I nodded. For a moment I wondered if I was the only person in town questioning that. When Carol finally left, the house became silent again. I carried our coffee cups to the sink and noticed the corner of the envelope still peeking out from beneath the dish towel. It felt almost as though it had been waiting for me. I uncovered it slowly. The room seemed unusually quiet. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming. I stared at the envelope for nearly a full minute. Then I picked it up. My fingers traced the typed letters. Bennett Family Living Trust. I wasn't afraid of what might be inside. I was afraid of what opening it would say about me. Trust works both ways. If I opened it, didn't that mean I'd already decided not to trust my own son? I set it back on the table. No. I whispered the word aloud. I'm not doing this. I carried the envelope into the front hallway and placed it on the small table beside the door. The moment Daniel came back, I'd hand it to him unopened. Decision made. Problem solved. Or so I thought. About an hour later, my cell phone buzzed. Daniel. Hi. Mom. Hey. I think I left something at your house. I know. The envelope? Yes. I have it. He let out a slow breath. Thanks. When do you want to pick it up? I'll come by after work. There was a brief pause. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. You didn't open it, right? The words were gentle. Not accusing. Not suspicious. Just careful. No. Another pause. Thank you. That answer surprised me. Not because he thanked me, because he sounded relieved. Truly relieved. So, I said carefully, what exactly is it? It's paperwork. I figured that much. He laughed softly. Legal paperwork. I guessed that too. I'll explain it. When? Soon. Soon isn't a day on the calendar, Daniel. I know. I'd rather you tell me now. Silence. I waited. Finally, he spoke. I'm still waiting for a few things. What things? I can't really say. You can't. Or you won't? He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly said, I promise you'll know everything before anyone signs anything. Anyone signs anything. There it was again. Signing. Not once. Not twice. Over and over. When we ended the call, I stood staring at the silent phone. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly. I was confused. That afternoon I decided to distract myself by finishing the last of my Christmas shopping. The grocery store was crowded enough to make everyone impatient. Shopping carts bumped into one another. Children reached for candy their parents had no intention of buying. Holiday music played so loudly that nobody seemed to notice it anymore. I had just picked up a loaf of bread when I heard a familiar voice. Anna. I turned. Mr. Harris smiled as he adjusted the scarf around his neck. He looked exactly as he always had. Gray hair. Perfect posture. The calm expression of a man who had spent 40 years solving other people's problems. Merry Christmas, he said. And to you. We chatted for a minute about the weather and how impossible it had become to find a parking space anywhere in town. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry, he said. I need to answer this. He turned slightly away. I wasn't trying to read his phone. I truly wasn't. But the screen lit up just long enough for one name to catch my eye. Daniel Bennett. A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Mr. Harris answered. Hello, Daniel. He walked a few steps farther down the aisle. His voice became too quiet to hear. I watched him nod several times. Then he looked over his shoulder. Not at me. Past me. As though checking whether anyone else was nearby. The conversation lasted less than a minute. When he returned, his smile had returned too. Sorry about that. No problem. He reached for a carton of milk. Tell your son I said hello. I will. He'll probably be seeing me tomorrow. I blinked. Oh? We have a meeting. He said it casually, almost absent-mindedly. But after the previous 24 hours, nothing about those words felt casual. What kind of meeting? I asked. He smiled politely. You know I can't discuss my clients. Of course. Attorney-client privilege. Perfectly reasonable. Perfectly normal. Yet somehow, the answer only made my questions grow louder. We wished each other a Merry Christmas and went our separate ways. I pushed my shopping cart toward the checkout lanes, but I couldn't remember half the items I'd come to buy. My mind kept returning to the same thought. Danielle, Mr. Harris, the trust, the envelope, the conversation I'd overheard. Each piece, by itself, meant almost nothing. Together, they were beginning to form a picture. I just wasn't sure whether it was the real picture, or one my fear was quietly painting for me. I barely remembered driving home. The grocery bags sat untouched in the trunk for nearly 10 minutes before I realized I was still sitting behind the steering wheel. The engine had been turned off. The radio had gone silent. Yet my thoughts refused to slow down. Daniel. Mr. Harris. A meeting tomorrow. Legal paperwork. The trust. Every piece fit together a little too neatly. By the time I carried the groceries into the kitchen, I no longer felt like I was imagining things. I felt as though I had simply noticed something everyone else expected me to miss. I unpacked the milk first. Then the vegetables. The bread. Halfway through putting away a carton of eggs, I realized I'd placed the cereal in the refrigerator. I laughed at myself. Not because it was funny, because it frightened me. Lately little mistakes had become more common. Walking into a room and forgetting why. Misplacing my glasses while they rested on top of my head. Searching for my phone while I was talking on it. Everyone my age joked about those things. Still, for the first time, I wondered whether Daniel noticed them too. The thought disappeared almost as quickly as it came. No, this wasn't about forgetfulness. This was about secrecy. That evening, Emily called. Her voice sounded cheerful. So, are you still planning on making your pecan pie? I've made it every Christmas for 35 years. I figured the tradition was safe. We talked about desserts. About Ben begging to open presents early. About Lily insisting Santa probably preferred oatmeal cookies over chocolate chip because they were healthier. It felt wonderfully normal. Then Emily said something that made my stomach tighten. Daniel might stop by tomorrow afternoon. Oh? He has. One more errand. What kind of errand? There was the smallest pause. I'm not actually sure. The answer came too quickly after the hesitation. Emily was a terrible liar. Even worse than Daniel. I say, you'll be home, right? I wasn't planning to go anywhere. Good. Another pause. Well, I'll let you go. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at the dark screen of my phone. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to avoid answering simple questions. Enough to sound nervous. Enough to make me feel like the only person left outside whatever conversation everyone else was having. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Snow had finally arrived. A thin white blanket covered the backyard. The maple tree looked almost magical, its branches sparkling beneath the porch light. Robert loved mornings like this. He used to wake before everyone else just to shovel the driveway before the neighbors had finished breakfast. I could almost picture him outside in his old green coat. The image lingered for only a second before reality settled back over me. At 11:30, I heard tires crunch across the fresh snow. I looked through the front window. Daniel's truck. He wasn't alone. A dark sedan pulled into the driveway behind him. Mr. Harris climbed out. For a moment, I simply stared. Then something inside me dropped. Neither man noticed I was watching. Daniel carried a leather folder beneath one arm. Mr. Harris held a slim briefcase. Legal paperwork. A lawyer. At my house. Without telling me why. I stepped away from the window just before the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Daniel smiled. Morning, Mom. Mr. Harris nodded politely. Anna. I forced a smile. This is a surprise. We won't stay long, Daniel said. We just need to go over a few things. A few things? He glanced toward Mr. Harris. Then back at me. Can we sit down? I led them into the living room. The Christmas tree blinked quietly in the corner. No one commented on it. Daniel placed the leather folder on the coffee table. Mr. Harris remained standing. I'll just get organized, he said. He removed several documents from his briefcase. I recognized the heavy cream-colored paper. Legal documents always seem to come on heavier paper. Daniel folded his hands together. He looked nervous. Not guilty. Nervous. Mom? I've been meaning to explain. Then explain. The words came out sharper than I intended. He blinked. I will. When? Today. Good. Silence settled across the room. Finally, I looked directly at the folder. Is that the trust? Daniel hesitated. Yes. So I was right. His eyes narrowed slightly. About what? That you've been meeting with Mr. Harris. Yes. And keeping it from me. I wasn't trying to. You weren't trying? I heard my own voice rising. For days I've overheard conversations. I've found legal papers. I've watched everyone stop talking the moment I ask a question. You've all acted as though I'm supposed to smile and pretend not to notice. Mr. Harris quietly closed his briefcase. Neither man interrupted me. That almost made it worse. I've lived in this house for 44 years. I looked at Daniel. And suddenly lawyers are walking into my living room carrying trust documents, without anyone thinking I deserve an explanation? Daniel rubbed his forehead. You do deserve one. Then why haven't I gotten one? He looked genuinely pained. I was trying to do this the right way. The right way? I laughed. There are very few ways to secretly involve lawyers in someone's life that feel right. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. Those two words should have softened me. Instead, they fueled every fear that had been growing since I overheard him in the study. Is this about the house? His head lifted immediately. What? The house. No. Then why does every conversation seem to happen behind closed doors? Because. He stopped himself. Because. One word. Then nothing. Exactly like before. Exactly enough to convince me there was something he refused to say. I slowly stood. I trusted you. You still can. Can I? Neither of us spoke. Outside, snow continued falling in slow, silent flakes. The room suddenly felt much smaller than it had only minutes earlier. Finally, I looked at Mr. Harris. I'd like to ask you something. Of course. Does this paperwork affect my house? He answered carefully. It affects your estate planning. Does it affect ownership? I can't discuss the details until the proper meeting. Another careful answer. Another answer that wasn't really an answer. I turned back toward Daniel. So there are details. Mom, there are details you're asking me to wait for. Just a little longer. No. The word surprised even me. No more waiting. Daniel stared at me. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I saw hurt in my son's eyes that I couldn't explain. I never wanted you to hear any of this way, he said quietly. I looked at the folder on the coffee table. At the neat stack of papers. At the lawyer who refused to answer. At my son who kept asking for trust while offering almost none in return. And for the first time in my life, I wondered whether the little boy who used to confess stealing a cookie before he'd taken a bite had somehow learned to keep much bigger secrets. The silence seemed to stretch forever. Daniel didn't move. Neither did I. Mr. Harris quietly gathered the papers he had spread across the coffee table but didn't place them back inside his briefcase. He looked like a man who knew exactly how this conversation was supposed to happen and exactly how badly it had gone. Finally, Daniel spoke. I'm asking you to trust me. I almost laughed. You picked an unfortunate word. His shoulders dropped. I know. No, Daniel. I don't think you do. I picked up the leather folder and held it in both hands. This has my family's name on it. Our family's name. And somehow I'm the last person anyone wants to tell. He reached toward me, then stopped himself. I've never wanted to keep you in the dark. It certainly feels that way. Another long silence settled between us. Mr. Harris finally cleared his throat. Anna, perhaps we should reschedule. Daniel nodded immediately. I think that's best. That surprised me. If this had truly been some elaborate plan to pressure me into signing something, why leave? Why not insist? Why not persuade me? Instead, Daniel carefully slid the folder back toward himself without opening it. He didn't even ask me to look inside. He simply stood. I'm sorry this became painful. There was genuine sadness in his voice. Not frustration. Not anger. Sadness. I'll call you after Christmas, he said softly. Then both men walked to the front door. Daniel paused before stepping outside. I love you. For years, those words had always been enough. This time, I couldn't make myself answer. The front door closed. Their cars disappeared beneath the falling snow. The house became painfully quiet. I sat in Robert's old recliner for nearly an hour without turning on the television or picking up a book. Something didn't fit. That thought kept returning. If Daniel wanted something from me, why leave without it? He hadn't shown me a single page. Hadn't asked for one signature. Hadn't pressured me. In fact, he'd done almost everything possible to avoid discussing the documents. That wasn't how manipulation usually worked. Was it? By late afternoon, I couldn't stand the silence any longer. I put on my coat and drove to the cemetery. Snow covered the ground in soft white layers, leaving only the tops of the headstones visible. Robert always liked winter. He said snow made even sad places look peaceful. I brushed a thin layer of snow from his marker before sitting on the nearby bench. I wish you were here. The words escaped before I realized I was speaking aloud. You always knew how to explain Daniel. I smiled faintly. He got his stubbornness from you. The wind stirred through the pine trees. For several minutes, I simply sat there. Then another memory surfaced. Years ago, perhaps 10 years earlier, Robert had come home from meeting with Mr. Harris carrying a thick binder. I remembered teasing him. Planning our exciting legal future? He laughed. Planning so nobody has to fight after we're gone. I had rolled my eyes. You really think our family would fight over money? No. So why all the paperwork? Because good documents keep good families from becoming bad ones. At the time, I'd barely listened. Robert handled nearly all our legal paperwork. I trusted him completely. The memory should have reassured me. Instead, it left me wondering how much I had forgotten about those meetings. Driving home, I passed the little diner where Daniel and I used to eat breakfast every Saturday after Ben was born. Without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The same red booths. The same coffee mugs. The same waitress, Nancy, who somehow remembered everyone's favorite pie. She smiled the moment she saw me. Anna, haven't seen you in a while. I've been hiding from holiday shopping. She laughed. Smart woman. As she poured coffee, she asked the question everyone seemed to ask that week. How's Daniel? Boozy. He stopped in yesterday. I looked up. He did? Yeah. Grabbed lunch with Mr. Harris. My stomach tightened again. Nancy continued talking while wiping down the next table. They were here almost 2 hours. Working through Christmas, I guess. I suppose. She shrugged. Funny thing, though. What? I've known Daniel since he was a teenager. So have I. She smiled. I've never seen him look so worried. I frowned. Worried? He barely touched his sandwich. Mr. Harris kept telling him everything would be fine. My fingers slowly tightened around the warm coffee mug. Everything would be fine. That wasn't something people usually said to someone celebrating good news. It sounded different, almost comforting. Nancy wandered off to greet another customer. I sat alone with my thoughts. For the first time since all of this began, another possibility quietly entered my mind. What if Daniel wasn't hiding something from me? What if he was carrying something for me? The idea felt almost ridiculous. If that were true, why keep it secret? Yet the more I replayed every conversation, the less certain I became. He had apologized. Repeatedly. He had asked for patience, not obedience. He had promised I would know everything before anyone signed anything. Anyone. Not just me. That word suddenly sounded important. When I returned home, evening shadows were already stretching across the living room. The Christmas tree lights reflected softly against the front window. Underneath it sat the wrapped presents Emily had dropped off earlier in the week. Each tag had been written in her careful handwriting. For Mom. Not Anna. Not Mrs. Bennet. Mom. I sat on the floor beside the tree and picked up the smallest package. It couldn't have weighed more than a few ounces. Emily had tied the ribbon a little crooked. Daniel had never learned to wrap presents properly. Every year she secretly rewrapped his gifts before bringing them over. I laughed despite myself. Some habits never changed. Then I noticed something tucked beneath the tree skirt. A folded piece of paper. Probably an old shopping list. I reached down and unfolded it. It wasn't a shopping list. It was a yellow sticky note in Daniel's handwriting. He must have dropped it while helping decorate a few days earlier. Across the note, in hurried block letters, were only 6 words. Don't forget Mom comes first. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. Just those 6 words. I stared at them for a long time. If Daniel truly cared only about the house, why would he need to remind himself of that? I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my sweater pocket. For the first time in days, certainty began to crack. Not enough to erase my fears. Not enough to answer my questions. But enough to make me wonder whether I had been trying to solve the wrong mystery all along. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in fresh snow. From my kitchen window, the neighborhood looked exactly the way Christmas cards always promised it would. White rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys, children bundled into oversized coats, already pulling sleds toward the small hill at the end of the street. Everything looked peaceful. Inside me, nothing was. I slipped the yellow sticky note from my sweater pocket and read it again. Don't forget Mom comes first. I had read those 6 words at least 20 times the night before. Every time I looked at them, they made less sense if my worst fears were true. By noon, the house was filled with familiar voices. Ben ran through the front door carrying a new football. Lily hugged me before I had time to close the door. Merry Christmas, Grandma. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Emily followed with a pumpkin pie balanced carefully in both hands. Daniel came in last. For a brief moment, neither of us knew whether to hug. Then he stepped forward anyway. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas. The embrace felt awkward. Not cold. Just fragile. As though neither of us wanted to make the first wrong move. The afternoon passed more quietly than any Christmas I could remember. Everyone tried a little too hard. Emily complimented every dish. Ben talked nonstop about football. Lily insisted on showing me photographs she'd taken through her new telescope. Daniel smiled often. But I noticed he hardly ate. Every few minutes, our eyes met across the table. Every time, one of us looked away first. After dinner, while the children played upstairs, Daniel walked into the living room. Can we talk? I nodded. He sat across from me. Not beside me. Across. As though he wanted me to feel free to leave if I wished. I've asked Mr. Harris to come. I wasn't surprised. He'll be here in a few minutes. Emily quietly closed the living room doors before joining the children upstairs. She gave Daniel's shoulder a gentle squeeze as she passed. No one spoke until the doorbell rang. Mr. Harris stepped inside carrying the same leather briefcase. This time, he placed it on the coffee table but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked directly at me. Anna. Before we discuss any documents, there's something you need to see. He removed a single sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one looked old. The paper had yellowed slightly around the edges. Across the front, written in handwriting I recognized instantly, were 4 words. To be opened later. I frowned. I know that handwriting. Mr. Harris nodded. You should. It's yours. A strange chill passed through me. He carefully slid the envelope across the table. I've kept this for almost 8 years. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. The date at the top stopped me. 8 years earlier. Robert was still alive. I began reading. Anna, if you're reading this, it means the day we hoped would stay far away has finally arrived. I asked Mr. Harris to keep this because I know myself. If I ever begin forgetting little things, I won't want every conversation to become about what I can no longer remember. I don't want my family watching me every minute, wondering whether today is the day I've changed. I want to live as normally as possible for as long as possible. If our trust ever needs to be updated because of changes in the law or because life changes around us, I don't want anyone explaining every legal detail before it's necessary. Knowing myself, I'll imagine the worst. I'll think people are trying to protect me because they believe I'm already gone. Please, don't let that happen. Let me stay myself until the moment the truth truly has to be shared. Promise me that. I stopped reading. My own handwriting stared back at me from the page. I had written every word. Every single one. Slowly, memories returned. Robert and I sitting in Mr. Harris's office. Talking about aging. Talking about dignity. Talking about how frightened I was of becoming someone who saw illness in every forgotten appointment. I remembered saying those words. I remembered insisting they be written down. Tears blurred the page. Mr. Harris spoke gently. A few months ago, the Bennett Family Living Trust required updating because of changes in state law. He opened the folder. No property was being transferred. No ownership was changing. In fact, he turned one page toward me. The revisions reduced Daniel's authority and increased the protections requiring independent review before any major financial decision can ever be made. I looked at Daniel. He hadn't moved. His eyes were already filled with tears. "I didn't know how to tell you," he whispered. "You asked us not to." Mr. Harris nodded. Robert reminded Daniel of that promise before he passed away. Daniel swallowed hard. "He made me promise I'd honor your wishes." I thought. He stopped, struggling to continue. "I thought keeping that promise meant protecting you." I covered my mouth with one hand. Every conversation, every secret, every awkward silence, every unanswered question, none of it had been about taking something from me. It had all been about trying not to take away the life I had asked to keep. I looked back down at my own letter. Knowing myself, I'll imagine the worst. I let out a shaky laugh through my tears. I was right. Daniel looked confused. I imagined exactly the worst. He nodded slowly. So did I. We both smiled for the first time in days. Only then did I realize how exhausted he looked. As though he'd been carrying something far heavier than legal paperwork. I reached across the coffee table and took both of his hands. "They're still warm," I said softly. He laughed through his tears. "I hope so. I'm sorry." "No." He shook his head. "I'm the one who's sorry. I should have found a better way. You kept your promise. I almost lost your trust." I squeezed his hands. "And next time," he looked up, "trust me enough to tell me the truth." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I will." Mr. Harris quietly closed his briefcase. "I believe my work here is finished." None of us tried to stop him. Some moments belong only to a family. After he left, Emily came downstairs with Ben and Lily. Neither child understood why their father and grandmother were crying. Ben looked worried. "Is everything okay?" Daniel smiled. He wrapped one arm around my shoulders. "It is now." Lily climbed into my lap. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart? Why are you smiling and crying at the same time?" I kissed the top of her head. "Because sometimes your heart has to do both before it can finally feel at peace." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked slowly through the house. Past Robert's desk. Past the crooked paper angel Daniel had made in second grade. Past the wooden swing outside the back window. Nothing in the house had changed. Not really. The shelves still held Robert's books. The walls still carried decades of laughter. The house was still mine. But something inside me had changed forever. I had spent days believing love had become deception. Instead, I discovered something far more complicated. Love can become silence. Love can become fear. Love can become promises made with the best intentions and carried out in the worst possible way. Sometimes people hide the truth not because they want to control the ones they love, but because they're terrified of hurting them. I still believe honesty matters. More than ever. Because I learned that Christmas. Protecting someone should never mean leaving them alone with their imagination. Imagination can build fears that reality never intended. And sometimes, the bravest promise a family can make isn't to protect one another from the truth. It's to face the truth together.